What is my favorite early church council? Coming from Charles again. All right. I'd have to say, it's very interesting. Let's actually look at some of these. So, and I'll probably do a separate video just on this document. And I'll probably have to break it into multiple videos. But we have here, we have a Council of Jerusalem, which happens in the first century, and that's very early. 49 AD, we're told it settled Gentile controversy, that there was no need for full adherence to Jewish law. As you might remember, Peter and Paul kind of had their not real conflict. They had some dispute about whether they should target and emphasize Jews or Gentiles. And as you're bringing in new Gentiles, people who weren't Jewish, into the church, should they be followed again? Because all you have is the Old Testament and the old law to look at and all the purification rituals and everything. Should you be following those things? Or should you just let the Gentiles do whatever the dirty Gentiles do? So this settled that in the favor of Gentiles, that there was no need to adhere fully to the Jewish law, just elements of it. That is significant, but there are what are called ecumenical and general councils, and that is here in an appendix right here. Of course, the first general council, and don't ask me why they're called ecumenical or why they're called general. I just understand these to be just the ones that are universal. I think they mean general in the sense of universal. They have universal approval from within the church. And in fact, so universal that the first 7 are considered completely and almost universally, I'd say almost, there are some differences between some, like, you know, Coptic Christians perhaps, or some Catholic Oriental Orthodox Christians. But up to about the 7th council, the first 7 councils, you have more or less widespread universal agreement between all Christians. The rest of these, and we have 21 total, are going to be Catholic councils, because you have a certain split. Of course, this is us just looking in hindsight. We're not thinking, okay, now that we're to the 8th council, this is just going to be Catholic councils. In fact, later, at this time and later in here, you would have still other, we call them denominations now, but you would have other Christians outside the Catholic Church joining these councils. You even saw this present in the Vatican II in the 60s. There were Orthodox Christians present. There was a contingent of all kinds of Protestants there. Of course, they weren't like voting. I don't know if they took vote or they just sort of recorded their concerns or whatever it was. But they it might be like Puerto Rico, in Congress. It's like, you're allowed to be here and you can say what you want, but like your vote doesn't really fully count. Might have been one of those things. Vatican II is, yeah. But what among the first 7, let's say, what are my favorite? I don't know if I have which ones are really highly important. First, that Council of Nicaea, and second, that Council of Chalcedon. That 4th council, actually. If we go up here, and this is turning to now, we're in this later era, fine. We can see here the Council of Nicaea. What was its emphasis, right? We get our creed. We're also addressing Arianism, which for Arianism, you'd have to go back up here. Arianism was a heresy. It held that Jesus was a creation of God. He was a creature, not divine. Rejects the Trinity. It's going to be Unitarian. And so, in fact, you'll find this with all heresies. Heresies get recycled and they get spit out as something new. But just try to think to yourself, who are Arians today? Where are they? There are still Arians today. They're not called Arians. First of all, let's see if anybody in the chat can put this. Who are Arians today? First of all, first comes to mind, Mormons are Arians because they are Unitarian. And Jesus being divine, they say he's a creation, he's a creature. and not only Mormons, Muslims, because Jesus is merely a prophet. So, of course, that would entail he's only a creation. And, of course, he rejects the Trinity. And also, notably, Jehovah's Witnesses also would be Arians. So that would be right here. So it addressed Arianism. It also addressed the nature of Christ in the sense of, not in the sense of Christology per se, because you don't get that until Chalcedon, but it addressed more so the nature of Christ with respect to the Trinity. So his divinity is here. So you have this council also addressing the celebration of Passover, how to. And so you start to see stuff like now, okay, how do we worship as Christians more formally? You get the development of church liturgical calendars and liturgical practices, um, things like that. And that's only in the first council. So that's very early. So Council of Nicaea is very, very significant because it's also the first ecumenical general council. The second one I think would probably come in second place for me would be the Council of Chalcedon in 451. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but it's called the Chalcedonian Box. I was taught this in Chalcedonian Box. Actually might be charged on this online. I've never looked it up. And the idea here is the Council of Chalcedon, its emphasis is Christology. All right. So you've got the relationship between the divinity and the humanity of Christ. And we know, of course, Trinitarian Christians who take Jesus to be part of the Trinity. That is, you may call them Orthodox Christians, you may call them Bible-believing Christians, you may call them Catholic Christians, but basically true Christians, right? We're not talking about Mormons, we're not talking about Jehovah's Witness, Arians, anything like that would be considered a heresy. True Christians understand that Christ is fully divine and fully human, right? And that Christ is one person, not two, and he has two natures. Okay. So the Chalcedonian box, then, let's see if I can remember. So you've got the two edges here and you've got the two edges top and bottom. So the two edges, let's say one side would be the idea that it's got to be one person, not two. So you got to be, float within that range. And then you have to have two natures, not one. Okay. And so if you are in that box, that is where Christology is done, the study of Christ. A proper and orthodox Christological view would be found within those parameters. Anything outside of those parameters would be heresy. And we can see a couple of these right here, right? Of course, we already said with Arianism, it says Jesus is a creation of God. With Apollinarianism, we're told that they thought Jesus had a human body and soul, but a divine mind. This would deny Christ's two natures, because you're saying that only he's in part human, only he's in part divine. No, he's fully human, he's fully divine. This would also be one that violates that Chalcedonian box, saying that Christ is two separate persons. Nope, he's not two separate persons. He's one person, but he has two natures, a divine nature and a human nature. So that would be another really, really, to answer that question, it'd be another, and try to think of more questions. There's only got a few minutes left in order to get your questions in. That'll be another really, really important council. The Council of Nicaea, and then the Council of Chalcedon. And of course, you also see here's an interesting thing from the Council of Chalcedon here. You also see that some of these councils have second council, Council of Constantinople, and eventually we also get this, we also get a second Council of Nicaea in later years. We only recognize the first council of Ephesus. There is a so-called second council in 449, but it's not one of the major ones. It is considered valid, according to Roman Catholic, it is considered valid by the Oriental Orthodox Church, but the Roman Catholic Church, for whatever reason, only considers that a synod or a meeting of the bishops. That, I suppose the difference between a synod and a council would be that councils, the reason why councils are so important, by the way, and why we hold them in such high priority is because they make big decisions. And it's not that the councils themselves are infallible or that they, but that they deliver documents that are authoritative, and where we get all of our church teaching in the magisterium on. And as a Protestant, you might be like, well, that's not, how dare they? Church teaching authoritative? Never. Yeah, actually, because the church council and the church teaching is where we got, the New Testament canon. So if you don't have church teaching, and again, the people who were present, and you can look this up, for each one of these councils, we have good estimates about how many people were present at these councils, and individually, like who was present, but among the big names too, at each one of these councils. So they were very well documented, and the people who were present were bishops and cardinals, and they were very, very brilliant people. I mean, we're still reading these guys today. I challenge you to go try to read some of their, like, say, Athanasius on the Trinity or Augustine's Confession. You're going to be blown away by the clarity and depth of their writing. These were brilliant, brilliant minds. And I think also this goes back to, why did they only start having councils in the 300s? I think God mysteriously, in his omniscience and in his providence, he sets the church that he loves on the right path at the right time. It wasn't time yet for theologians, I think, prior to this era, but he waited, and each age has its emphasis. Prior to this age, it was just survival. It was just that they didn't, get squashed out by persecution. But it was only during this period, again, these church theologians, these fathers, in this sense, derivatively fathers, we still read,